is another pinch-hitting storyteller who has come to us at the last minute. She is a storyteller from Williamsburg, Virginia, and sometimes we have seen her in costume doing portrayals of American women because she is a historian, an actress, a playwright, as well as a storyteller. But she also tells folk tales, personal stories, and ghost tales. And here today is Darci Tucker.
I can't tell you how good it feels to be back at Tejas. Yay! Haven't been here since I was on my way in 2020. I was in Oklahoma City packing my bags on my way down when I got the call that the festival was, So, hi. I'm going to tell you one of my favorite British folk tales today. The Duke sat looking out his window. His vast estate stretched before him, and out on the lawn, he saw his son. His 3-year-old son who was about to be 4, his son in whom he had all his hopes and dreams for the future planted, the son that would go on to make that family proud, the next Duke in a proud line. That son was everything to him. And as he watched that son, he thought about who would that son marry? And in his mind, he went through all of the great families and thought about who might have a daughter. And then he thought, there is a fortune teller I could ask. Not that I believe in fortune telling, but I could ask. So not long after, he had gone out with a hunting party, and on his way back, he decided he would stop in the village and he would talk to the fortune teller. And she said to him, "Your son will marry the daughter of the pauper on the edge of the village, the daughter that was born this very day." Oh, no. No, my son will never marry the daughter of a pauper. There must be some mistake. But the fortune teller said, no, that's what the fates say. So the Duke stalked out of her house. He climbed up onto his sleek black stallion, and he rode to the edge of the town. And there he saw the pauper sitting out on his front stoop, weeping. And he said to the man, "What's wrong? Why do you cry?" And the man said, "My wife just gave me another child. This is our 9th child. I don't have money to feed the 8 children we already had, and now there's a 9th. We will all starve." And the Duke said, "Don't worry. I'll take care of the child for you." "You would do that?" said the man. "Yes, I'll take care of your child. Go, take the child from your wife and give it to me." So the man went into his hovel. He tore that newborn babe out of his wife's arms. He handed that baby to the Duke, who held her lovingly in his arms until he was out of sight. And then he rode to the high cliff that looked down on that raging, rushing river. He looked at the river for a while. He looked down at the baby. And then he threw her over the cliff. Now, don't worry. She was wrapped in swaddling clothes, and as she fell, those rags filled with air. And when she landed in the water, she didn't sink. She floated out to sea, where a fisherman was casting his nets. This fisherman and his wife had always wanted a child. They were now too old to have children. God had never given them one. And the man heard a noise, a squeaking out in the water, and he saw a bundle of rags, and he waded out, and when he reached that bundle of rags, it was a baby. God had finally given them a baby. And he scooped that baby up and he ran home to his wife and he showed her and said, "It's a miracle, it's a miracle." And they fell on their knees and thanked God for that miracle. And they loved that girl more than any parents have ever loved a child. And when she was 12, her mother died. So the girl became the woman of the household. She began doing all of the cooking and the cleaning for her father. She mended his nets. She mended his clothes. And one day, as she was mending his nets, he came running back to the house. He said, daughter, there's a hunting party coming. It's a grand group of people. We must give them a meal, but we have nothing in the house." And she said, "Don't worry, Father. I can find something." And out of nothing, she managed to create a feast that was as beautiful to the eye as it was to the tongue. And the Duke, at the head of that hunting party, was impressed by just how fine the food was. And he said, "Your wife is a very good cook." And the fisherman said, No, it's not my wife, it's my daughter. I'm very proud of my daughter." And the Duke said, "Well, I must meet her and give her my compliments." So the girl came out. And he complimented her on her food and began to ask her questions. He asked her how old she was, and she told him about her father, the fisherman, finding her all those years ago floating in the water. Now, she was at this time 16 years old, and the Duke's son was 20. When he realized who she was, the Duke called for a piece of paper and a quill pen. And when they were brought to him, he wrote a little note. And he folded it, and he handed it to the girl, and he said, "If you stay here all your life in a fishing hut, what will your life be? I have a much better opportunity for you. My brother has a vast estate, and he needs a cook, and you are a wonderful cook. So this is a letter of introduction to my brother so that you can be a cook for him." And the girl and her father looked at each other, and they loved each other so much, and the thought of parting was incredibly painful to them. But the fisherman said, You've got to go. He's right. There's no future for you in a fishing cottage by the sea. Go. Go and come and visit me from time to time. So he waved goodbye to his daughter the next morning. He put a few coins in her hands for the journey, and she began the long walk to where the Duke's brother lived. It was a 2-day walk, and so she stopped at an inn when she reached the end of the first day of long walking. She was so tired. She paid her money. She went up to her room and was sound asleep in no time. Crashing sounds suddenly woke her, and she heard people downstairs screaming and furniture being thrown from side to side. And before she knew it, the door of her room was kicked open, and in rushed highwaymen that were going through the building one by one, room by room, robbing the inhabitants. And she screamed, and they grabbed her and said, "Oh, pretty little girl, we'll deal with you later." And they threw her in the closet, and they locked it. And they began rifling through the room, her few meager possessions. And one of them said, "Oh, a letter. Let's see what the letter says." And she heard them open the letter, and she heard a voice reading, "My dear brother, it has been so long since I've seen you. I hope you are well, and I hope my son's visit to your estate is going well. I am sending you a visitor, and when you receive this letter, And then she heard nothing. Because outside that closet door, that highwayman had looked at the others and said, "Oh, I don't believe what I'm reading." He was speaking low enough that she couldn't hear. But what he was reading was, "When you receive this letter, I hope you will do me the favor of putting its bearer to death." Now, these were highwaymen, but they were not murderers. And they thought about that poor girl locked in the closet, and they were not going to send her to her death. So they rummaged around and they found another piece of paper and they found a quill and some ink and they wrote a new note. My dear brother, it's been so long since we've seen each other. I hope my son's visit with you is going very well. When you receive this letter, I ask that you will marry its bearer to my son. And they chuckled and they folded the note and they put it back with the girl's things. And then they let her out of the closet and they said, Madam, so sorry to have disturbed you. We meant nothing by it. Please forgive us. And they left her. A very strange encounter, and she didn't sleep much the rest of the night. But in the morning, she packed her things and she began walking. And when she reached the Duke's brother's house, he opened the door and she handed him the letter. And he opened the letter and said, Nephew, come down, there's someone your father wants you to meet. It was love at first sight. And within days, they were wed. And after a week and a half, 2 weeks, the son took his new bride home to his father's house. And when the Duke saw them walk in together, well, this is a surprise, he said. What have we here? His son said, this is my wife, who you thought I should marry. Did I? He said, well, why don't we have a bit to eat and get to know one another better, since I've hardly met the girl. And they talked over supper, and he seemed happy, and at the end of the meal, he said, son, as I say, I hardly know this girl. I'd like time to get to know my new daughter better. Why don't we take a walk, just the girl and I? And so the two of them walked out of the house and out to the cliffs above the sea, and they were talking very peacefully, happily. She thought what a kind man he was, until suddenly he grabbed her by the shoulders and he said, how dare you, you vixen? What have you done marrying my son? You have no right to marry my son. And he took her towards the edge of the cliff and he tried to throw her over, but she was strong, she was young, and she fought him off. And as she was backing away from him, he took his ring off his hand and he said, this is my ruby ring. Don't you ever darken my door again unless you have my ruby ring in your hand. And he threw it as far out to sea as he could. He turned on his heel, walked away, and she stood there stunned. Where could she go? She couldn't go back to his house. She was too far from her father's house. Where would she go? And so she began to walk, and eventually she came across a country house, and she knocked on the door and asked if they had work, and they needed a scullery maid, so she went to work scrubbing pots and pans. And over time, she gained enough confidence to tell the cook that she herself was a very good cook. And so from time to time, the cook would let her make something, and that made her life a little more bearable. One day, word came that a great hunting party would stop at the estate to dine. And so the carts of fish were brought in, and vegetables, and all of the things that were brought in that the cook would need to create a feast. And the girl said, can I help? Well, you're a scullery maid, so roll up your sleeves first, start gutting the fish. Well, she began to gut them one by one until suddenly, within the gut of one, the ruby ring. She said to the cook, if it's not too much to ask, could I cook the fish, just the one for the Duke? I mean, you can do everything else, but could I just cook that one fish, please? And the cook was skeptical, but she knew the girl cooked very well, so she said, well, all right, just that one fish, that's all. When the party arrived, they sat down to dine. The feast was beautiful, it was delicious, and the Duke said, "I must meet the cook." So the cook walked out of the kitchen and took her accolades, but she said, "Sir, in all honesty, I made everything but your fish. There is a girl in the kitchen who made yours. She's a very good cook." And he said, "Well, then I must meet her." The girl walked out of the kitchen. She had his ring on her thumb. He turned pale. She said, "Tell them what you did. Tell them, or I will." And he gulped. And he told them that he had tried to throw her over the cliff. And then he told them things she didn't even know, that he had tried to have his brother kill her, that he himself had tried to kill her as an infant by throwing her over the cliff. And the story says that she forgave him, he took her home to his son, they all lived happily ever after, and maybe that's what happened. Or maybe he was dragged before a magistrate and made to pay for his crimes. I don't know. Only you can decide. Thank you.